Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to tonight's talk. The topic of tonight's talk is going to be an Artemis program update. And the reason for the talk, well, there's really two reasons. First of all, it's been a while since I've put together an Ashley talk like this. And I wanted to research the Artemis program further to strengthen my knowledge and to get myself up to speed on its progress. To one, give this presentation, and two, give me the foundation for a new public planetarium program that I'm currently putting together. So this talk should work twofold. By the way, please feel free to stop me at any time to offer your input on anything that I talk about today. However, let's please keep those discussions brief during the presentation, and we can have those potentially longer dialogues at the end or next week. So the last time a human being set foot on the moon was in December of 1972 by Apollo astronaut Gene Cernan. He was the last of only 12 human beings to have ever set foot on another world. And for the record, that was over 52 years ago. Since that time, NASA and other space agencies worldwide have done amazing things when it comes to space exploration using rockets, landers, orbiters, rovers, space observatories, and even a helicopter. With robotics, we have visited every planet in our solar system and an incredible list of moons, asteroids, comets, and an array of minor planets. The idea and official roadmap for returning human beings to the moon and eventually Mars began in 2004 with NASA's Vision for Space Exploration, which was announced on January 14th, 2004 by President George W. Bush and NASA Administrator Sean O'Keefe. This vision came about in response to the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster, which occurred the year prior. Due to a piece of foam that broke free from the external fuel tank during its launch and damaged the left wing. We lost 7 astronauts that first day of February 2003. This was a terrible day. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was just as awful as the Challenger disaster. And these were very fresh wounds in the eyes of the public. The crewed spaceflight program that came in response to the goals laid out in the Vision for Space Exploration was NASA's Constellation program. The Constellation program was really a redesign for the Vision for Space Exploration after Sean O'Keefe's successor, Michael Griffin, took over as NASA administrator. The major goals of the program were the completion of the International Space Station and a return to the moon no later than 2020, with a crewed flight to Mars as the ultimate goal. From the Constellation program, we see the development of spacecraft and booster vehicles to replace the space shuttle, including the Ares 1 and Ares 5 rocket boosters. Ares 1 was designed to launch mission crews into orbit. It had only one test launch with no crew on board on October 28, 2009. And here's an image of that. We could see it painted entirely white. Both Ares rockets were ultimately going to be orange in color. The Ares 5 booster would have been used to launch other hardware requiring a heavier lift capacity, but it never got past the concept phase. Also, from the Constellation program, we see the development of the Orion crew capsule with Lockheed Martin as the prime contractor and Boeing selected to build the primary heat shield. The Constellation program also included the Earth departure stage, secondary booster. And the Constellation program included a lunar lander named Altair, very reminiscent of the Apollo program landers. The Earth departure stage was the propulsion system designed to put Orion and the lunar lander on a trajectory from within low Earth orbit. It would have been put into Earth orbit by an Ares 5 rocket. The Orion spacecraft would have been launched by the Ares 1 rocket, and then would have met and docked with the Earth departure stage. And from there, the crew would begin its journey to the moon in a process known as an Earth orbit rendezvous. And here we can see NASA's exploration roadmap as of 2007. Remember, the goal was to have boots on the ground by 2020, giving them a 13-year timeline from this point in history. In the upper right of the graphic, we see that by now, Mars expedition designs should have been well underway. In 2009, there was a very important review conducted by the U.S. Human Spaceflight Plans Committee, better known as the Augustine Committee. The review found that the Constellation program could not be executed without substantial increases in funding. In April of 2010, President Obama made a major space policy speech at Kennedy Space Center. Attendees included the then NASA administrator, Charles Bolden. Buzz Aldrin was in attendance. The president rejected immediate plans to return to the moon. Not that he was not planning to go to the moon eventually, just the immediate plans, on the premise that the current plan had become non-viable. He instead promised $6 billion in additional funding and called for the development of a new heavy lift rocket program to be ready for construction by 2015 with crewed missions to Mars by the mid-2030s. So from this, we now have NASA's Space Launch System, or SLS rocket, manufactured by Aerojet Rocketdyne, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and United Launch Alliance. The announcements during the speech included a modification of the Orion capsule from its original purpose as a crewed spacecraft for flights to the ISS and the moon into an emergency escape capsule for the International Space Station. The new policy changes from a moon-first approach to a variety of destinations resembling what's called a flexible path approach, which had been one of the options recommended by the Augustine Committee, including inner solar system locations such as lunar orbit, Lagrange points, near-Earth objects, and the moons of Mars. Obama said, and I quote, "Early in the next decade, a set of crewed flights will test and prove the systems required for exploration beyond low Earth orbit. And by 2025, we expect new spacecraft designed for long journeys to allow us to begin the first ever crewed missions beyond the moon into deep space. So we'll start by sending astronauts to an asteroid for the first time in history," end quote. And in a major shift in the function of NASA in American human spaceflight, the Obama administration proposal would rely solely on launch vehicles designed, manufactured, and operated by private aerospace companies, with NASA paying for flights for government astronauts. The Artemis program was formally established in 2017 through Space Policy Directive 1. Although it hadn't yet been named at this time, and we don't yet see this Artemis logo. And the directive goes to say, quote, "Lead an innovative and sustainable program of exploration with commercial and international partners to enable human expansion across the solar system and to bring back to Earth new knowledge and opportunities. Beginning with missions beyond low Earth orbit, the United States will lead the return of humans to the moon for long-term exploration and utilization, followed by human missions to Mars and other destinations," end quote. So it was this Space Policy Directive 1 which authorized the Lunar Focus Campaign, or our Moon First approach. So again, the program's stated long-term goal is to establish a permanent base on the moon to facilitate human missions to Mars. So we're nearly back to a constellation-like program in that the focus is on the moon first, then Mars. This new campaign, as a result of Space Directive 1, or Artemis, draws upon legacy spacecraft programs, including the Orion space capsule, the Lunar Gateway space station, and commercial lunar payload services. Finally, the directive creates entirely new programs, such as the Human Landing System, which will bring crews to the surface of the moon. The Space Launch System, or SLS, is expected to serve as the primary launch vehicle for the Orion spacecraft, while commercial launch vehicles will launch various other elements of the program. In March of 2019, Vice President Mike Pence announced that NASA's moon landing goal would be accelerated by 4 years with a planned landing in 2024. And in May of 2019, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine announced that the new program would be named Artemis, after the goddess of the moon in Greek mythology, who is the twin sister of Apollo. Here we see an illustration by blogger and space artist J.S. Paley of both Apollo and Artemis on the moon. Obviously, we are far behind the anticipated landing set for this year, 2024. The Artemis mission patch is dominated by the letter A, similar to the Apollo program patch. The A also represents the arrowhead from Artemis's quiver and a rocket launch. The blue arc represents the Earth crescent. The blue arc doubly represents Artemis's bow, illustrating how Earth is the source of the energy and effort that will send us to the moon. The gray circle at the top represents the moon, the stepping stone for Mars, and the red crossbar of the A represents our path to Mars. Why is NASA going back to the moon? NASA is not simply aiming to repeat the feats of the Apollo missions with Artemis. Instead, its goal is to go to the moon and stay there. This means establishing bases both in lunar orbit and on the moon's surface, although the primary goal for now still involves returning human beings to the moon by the middle of the decade. Key NASA mission objectives include equality, to land the first woman and first person of color on the lunar surface. Technology, from rockets to spacesuits, the technologies currently being developed are designed to pave the way for future deep space missions. Partnerships. The Artemis program is one of NASA's first large-scale collaborations with commercial companies such as SpaceX and Boeing. Long-term presence, where the Apollo 17 crew spent 3 days on the lunar surface. Artemis aims to establish a base to extend the trip to weeks and possibly months. Knowledge. As more is known about the moon compared with 50 years ago, and technologies have greatly advanced, NASA claims that the next series of missions will be able to retrieve samples more strategically than during the Apollo era. And resources. The discovery of water on the moon and potential deposits of rare minerals hold promise for both scientific and economic exploration and exploitation. And as always the case, the budget constraints can slow any well-laid plan. Obviously, we have not seen any new footprints on the moon this year. Early in the year 2020, the White House requested a funding increase to cover the Artemis program. However, in July of the same year, the House Appropriations Committee rejected the White House's request funding increase. The bill proposed in the House dedicated only $700 million towards the Human Landing System. I say only, but that's 81% short of the requested amount. It was obvious by this time, 2020, that the 2024 lunar landing goal would no longer be a realistic goal. Anyway, NASA awarded this funding to Blue Origin, Dynetics, and SpaceX for competing in a 10-month-long preliminary design design study for the human landing system. In February 2021, thankfully, the Biden administration endorsed the Artemis program, and 2 months later, NASA contracted SpaceX to develop, manufacture, and fly 2 lunar landing flights with the Starship HLS lunar lander. Finally, there was a major initiative in the fiscal year 2022 budget for the human landing systems. The budget provided sufficient funding for the HLS program to maintain competition both leading up to and subsequent to the Artemis program's first crewed moon landings. A key component of the Artemis is NASA's Exploration Ground Systems, or EGS, based at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. EGS develops and operates the systems and facilities needed to process and launch rockets and spacecraft for NASA's Artemis missions. EGS plays a primary role in assembly, launch, and recovery of the rockets and spacecraft. EGS has helped transform Kennedy Space Center from a historically government-only launch complex to a spaceport that can handle several different kinds of spacecraft and rockets, both government and commercial. EGS includes launch processing, which uses various facilities at Kennedy for spacecraft and launch vehicle processing, including the iconic vehicle assembly building. The crawlers, 2 gigantic machines called crawler transporters, have carried the load of taking rockets and spacecraft to the launch pad for more than 50 years at Kennedy. The mobile launcher is the ground structure used to assemble, process, and launch NASA's Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft. Launch Pad 39B. EGS is preparing Kennedy Space Center's Launch Pad 39B to support NASA's Artemis missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. Recovery operations, the landing and recovery team, led by EGS, is responsible for safely recovering the Orion capsule and its crew following splashdown. And finally, the Launch Control Center, the ROCO-A Patron Launch Control Center, and its firing rooms is a vital part of EGS's infrastructure needed to launch future Artemis missions. The Artemis program is organized around a series of SLS missions, and these space missions will increase in complexity. NASA and its partners have completed Artemis 1 already, with plans currently in place for Artemis 2 through 5. While later missions have also been proposed and some are in the works. Each SLS mission centers on the launch of an SLS launch vehicle carrying an Orion spacecraft. Missions after Artemis 2 will depend on support missions launched by other organizations and spacecraft for support functions. Orion is a partially reusable crewed spacecraft. It consists of a crew module, space capsule designed by Lockheed Martin, and the European service module manufactured by Airbus Defence and Space. Gateway is a small space station that, once built, will orbit the moon. It is designed to be a flexible platform for missions to the moon and beyond. The Orion module will dock with Gateway, and from there, the astronauts will transfer into the human landing system. International partners such as the European Space Agency and Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency are working with NASA on the modules of Gateway. Gateway modules currently in development are HALO, which stands for Habitation and Logistics Outpost. This will be the foundation of the space station, providing a living space for the astronauts, as well as being the station's command and control center. And it's located right there in the middle of the station there on screen. We also have IHAB, which stands for International Habitation. This will be the second habitable element of Gateway and will be the main living area for the astronauts. It will have the space and equipment needed for astronauts to undertake experiments while living in orbit. European system providing refueling infrastructure and telecommunications. That's another module. It's also called eSprit, and today I think it's better known as the Lunar View. This module will provide enhanced communication capabilities, refueling systems, and a viewing port similar to the cupola window on the International Space Station. NASA's Space Launch System, SLS, is one of the world's tallest and most powerful rockets in the world. In fact, 15% more powerful than the original Saturn V rocket that first took astronauts to the moon during the Apollo program. Each launch is estimated to cost roughly $800 million. Here we see the SLS Block 1 crew configuration of the rocket. From the tail on the bottom left to the top in the upper right, we have 4 RS-25 rocket engines, followed by a core stage, which gets secured to 2 solid rocket boosters. On top of that is a launch vehicle stage adapter. Then we have the upper stage starting with an RL-10 rocket engine and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which gets attached to the Orion stage adapter and the spacecraft adapter. Then we have the service module, the crew module, and then finally the launch abort system at the very top. I have here some NASA infographics that sums up everything we like to know about the parts of SLS, starting here with the RS-25 engine. Here we can see that the engine is far from small. One RS-25 is about the size of a small car. Gas is leaving the engine nozzle so quickly that if on its own would travel from New York City to Los Angeles in 15 minutes. So Hollywood, here we come. Here we have the 212-foot tall core stage, which serves as the backbone of SLS. This includes a liquid hydrogen tank and a liquid oxygen tank. They hold 733 gallons of propellant to power the stage's 4 RS-25 engines needed for liftoff and Artemis missions to the moon and future missions to Mars. SLS has 2 of these solid rocket boosters. Each booster is made up of 3 segments, a forward assembly, which carries most of the forces of the rocket and houses the electronics. Then there's the 5-segmented motor assembly holding the propellant, which, as it says here, has the consistency of a pencil eraser. I like that analogy. And finally, the aft assembly, which helps with steering. These booster rockets weigh 1.6 million pounds each. They burn 6 tons of solid fuel every second and have a thrust of 3.6 million pounds. The ICPS, or the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, is the upper stage of SLS and will provide the boost to the moon from low Earth orbit. This stage uses liquid hydrogen housed in bottles and liquid oxygen housed in a large tank. And you can see where these are located in this graphic. They are using Aerojet Rocketdyne's RL-10 engine for this stage, which is capable of about 25,000 pounds of thrust. SLS is then stacked inside the vehicle assembly building at Kennedy Space Center. And if you've ever been to Kennedy Space Center, you know how monstrous this building really is. It better be to house that rocket. The mobile launcher serves as the platform to assemble and launch SLS and the Orion spacecraft. Here we see the mobile launcher up close. To stack SLS, first, the solid rocket boosters are stacked on the mobile launcher. The core stage is then placed between the boosters. The launch vehicle stage adapter goes on top. Next, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage is lowered on top of that. Then we have the Orion stage adapter, and finally, the Orion spacecraft and launch abort system to top off the entire kit. With the rocket fully assembled, the crawler transporter slides under the mobile launcher to move the entire skyscraper-sized SLS and Orion stack through the vehicle assembly building's 456-foot tall door. And finally, it slowly crawls over to the launch pad 39B and placed into position for launch. The human landing system portion of the Artemis program will take cargo and humans from Gateway to the moon's surface. NASA is working alongside commercial companies to develop both the human landing system, HLS, and a series of other vehicles for robotics and cargo. Unlike Apollo's lunar module, the landing systems for the Artemis missions are meant to be used for multiple missions. SpaceX will provide the HLS for Artemis 3 and 4 with its Starship rocket. But before it can be used on a real mission and human crews are allowed on board, SpaceX must perform at least one demo showing it can land Starship safely on the lunar surface. When Starship has passed all the rigorous safety tests, it will be ready to be used on a real mission. Blue Origin, meanwhile, have been contracted to provide a human landing system for Artemis 5. This lander will have the potential to increase the number of crew who can go down to the moon and allow them to stay for longer periods of time. Starship is a two-stage super heavy lift launch vehicle, and the Starship HLS variant will land astronauts on the moon starting with Artemis 3, proposed for 2026. Starship is the largest and most powerful rocket ever flown and has reusable rocket stages. It is capable of adapting to a wide range of space missions. Both stages of Starship are equipped with Raptor engines, which burn liquid methane and liquid oxygen. The main structure of Starship is made of stainless steel. As of this year, Starship is in development with an incremental approach involving test flights of prototype vehicles, which often end in destruction of the test vehicle. In reality, it could be years before it's ready to go to the moon, but it's encouraging to see support for the human landing system from both Democratic and Republican parties at this time. The Artemis program is concentrated on the South Pole region of the moon for many missions, including the construction of the moon base. At the lunar South Pole, the sun hovers below or just above the horizon. Mountains on the moon cast dark shadows, and deep craters protect perpetual darkness. Some of these areas are home to permanently shadowed regions that haven't seen sunlight in billions of years and experience temperatures as low as minus 334 degrees Fahrenheit. Breakthrough discoveries from robotic missions have confirmed that the moon is not bone dry or a dormant world. Lunar volatiles are likely trapped in the permanently shadowed regions of the moon. And those volatiles, including water, have a story to tell us about the history of the solar system. The ability to extract deep core samples could lead to a powerful discovery about the history of our solar system. These samples will be a 4.5 billion year testimony about our solar system. So a lot of the purpose of this program is science-centered. NASA is working with several American companies to deliver science and technology to the lunar surface through commercial lunar payload services, or CLPS. These companies, ranging in size, bid on delivering payloads for NASA. This includes everything from payload integration and operations to launching from Earth and landing on the surface of the moon. NASA currently has 14 providers on contract under CLPS that are eligible to bid on task orders. And this includes Astronomical, Blue Origin, Ceres Robotics, Deep Space Systems, Draper, Firefly Aerospace, Intuitive Machines, Lockheed Martin Space, Maston Space Systems, Moon Express, Orbit Beyond, Sierra Nevada Corporation, SpaceX, and Tyvak Nano Satellite Systems. So far, Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines have already delivered initial payloads. Planned for November, Astrobotic will deliver the agency's Volatiles Investigation Polar Exploration Rover, better known as Viper, to the lunar South Pole. Firefly Aerospace will deliver a suite of payloads to Mare Crisium, a large dark basaltic plain on the moon that filled an ancient asteroid impact. Intuitive Machines will deliver research, including science investigations and technology demonstrations to Rainier Gamma, a magnetic anomaly known as the lunar swirl located on the lunar near side in 2025. I'm sorry, in 2024. In 2025, Draper will deliver science investigations to Schrödinger Basin, a large lunar impact crater on the far side of the moon close to the South Pole. And in 2026, Firefly will deliver 2 agency payloads to the lunar far side and deliver a communications and data relay satellite into lunar orbit, which is an ESA or a European Space Agency collaboration with NASA. The Artemis program will make use of 2 types of spacesuits revealed in 2019. The Exploration Extravehicular Mobility Unit, or XEMU, and the Orion Crew Survival System suit. And in June 2022, NASA announced that commercially produced spacesuits would be developed by Axiom Space and Collins Aerospace. Here we see a prototype of Collins Aerospace next generation spacesuit that is currently in development for its low Earth orbit. So this will be used on the International Space Station as well. And recently, Axiom revealed its latest rendition of the Exploration Extravehicular Mobility Unit spacesuit planned to be used for Artemis 3. And I'm wondering if they'll stick with this color. And I'm assuming there's reasons why it's dark, probably because of the lack of light at the lunar South Pole, but that's just a guess. It looks cool too.
Hides dirt.
What's that?
Hides dirt.
Hides dirt. Lunar dust. Orion's first launch on SLS was originally set in 2016, but was rescheduled and finally launched on November 16th, 2022, as the Artemis 1 mission with robots and mannequins aboard, and it was a huge success. Formerly called Exploration Mission 1, this uncrewed mission was an extensive test of SLS and the Orion module. Artemis 1's journey took it 280,000 miles to the moon, where it orbited 80 miles above the lunar surface before continuing approximately 40,000 miles beyond into deep space. After a mission length of 25.5 days, the module splashed down in the Pacific Ocean near California on December 11th, and apparently just 2.5 miles away from its planned splashdown. You don't want crash. All right, so Artemis 2 will be a pioneering crewed spaceflight for the Artemis program, taking humans farther than they've ever been in space. After being launched on the SLS rocket, the 4-person crew will fly the Orion module 5,500 miles beyond the moon, completing a lunar flyby and a return to Earth. The mission will take between 8 to 10 days and collect valuable flight test data on the Orion module and its capabilities, including its life support systems. Artemis 2 is scheduled to launch no earlier than September 2025, and after being delayed from the original target launch date of November 2024. As far as choosing astronauts, NASA's Astronaut Selection Board reviews the applications and assesses each candidate's qualifications. The board then invites a small group of the most highly qualified candidates for interviews at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Of those interviewed, about half are invited back for second interviews. From that group, NASA's new astronaut candidates are selected. They report for training at Johnson Space Center and spend the next 2 years learning basic astronaut skills like spacewalking, operations and operating the space station, flying T-38 jet planes, and controlling a robotic arm. With NASA's plans for the future of exploration, new astronauts will fly farther into space than ever before on lunar missions and may be the first humans to fly to Mars. In April of 2023, NASA and the Canadian Space Agency announced the 4 astronauts that will venture around the moon on Artemis 2. Christina Koch was selected as NASA astronaut in 2013. She served as a flight engineer on the International Space Station for Expedition 59, 60, and 61. Koch set a record for the longest single space flight by any woman with a total of 328 days in space and participated in the first all-female spacewalk. She has been assigned as Mission Specialist 1 of NASA's Artemis 2 mission. Koch is a native of Grand Rapids, Michigan. She grew up in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and resides in Livingston, Montana, where she was selected to join the astronaut corps. Growing up, spending summers on her family's farm in Michigan, she was instilled with a passion for hard work and challenges. Her hobbies include surfing, rock climbing, community service, running, yoga, backpacking, photography, and travel. Victor J. Glover Jr. was selected as an astronaut in 2013. He recently served as pilot of the Crew 1 Dragon spacecraft named Resilience, which flew to the International Space Station, where he also served as flight engineer. Glover is a naval aviator and was a test pilot in the FA-18 Hornet, Super Hornet, and EA-18G Growler. He and his family have been stationed in many locations in the United States and Japan, and he's been deployed in combat and peacetime. Born in Pomona, California, he is married with 4 children. His mother lives in Southern California, and his father and stepmother live in Prosper, Texas. Reed Wiseman served as flight engineer aboard the International Space Station during the 165-day mission. Reed and his crewmates completed over 300 scientific experiments in areas such as human psychology, medicine, physical science, earth science, and astrophysics. They set a milestone for station science by completing a record 82 hours of research in a single week. Reed's hometown is Baltimore, Maryland. His late wife, Carol, is survived by their 2 children. His father, Bill, resides in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen will join the Artemis 2 crew as its mission specialist. Born in 1976 in London, Ontario, Colonel Hansen is married with 3 children. He enjoys sailboat cruising and racing, rock climbing, and mountain biking, so I think we might get along. Hansen holds a Bachelor of Science in Space Science from the Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston, Ontario. He earned a Master's of Science in Physics from the same institution in 2000, with research focused on wide field view satellite tracking. Hansen holds many special honors. I won't list them all, but it includes top Air Force graduate from the Royal Military College of Canada, and the list goes on. And here is the official Artemis 2 graphic. Here we get a quick glimpse of the Artemis mission timeline. This is the fiscal year 2025 President's budget request, Moon to Mars manifest.
Hey, could you go back 1 slide? A real quick comment. NASA, during their news presentation, they're still saying that Artemis 3 is going to launch in 2025. This says 2026.
I wonder if they messed that up. I'm I haven't heard of Artemis 3 planned for 2025.
I think NASA's website is still saying 2025.
Okay.
Like,
All right, good to know.
Yeah,
We'll have to
yeah.
double check.
Okay.
This is flexible.
Yeah.
This is a budget request too, so things may have changed since then. This is a 2025 budget request.
Dave,
Yes.
the original plan was for Artemis 3 in 2025, and that has been pushed back to 2026. So this chart is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Joel. So Artemis 3, the third Artemis mission will last 30 days and is set to be the first human moon landing since Apollo 17 in 1972. 4 astronauts will fly to the moon aboard Orion. They will dock with Gateway in orbit around the moon. The human landing system will be designed by SpaceX and will be a lunar adapted version of its reusable rocket Starship. Starship will take 2 astronauts down to the moon's south pole, a region previously unvisited by humans. The 2 astronauts selected will be the first woman and first person of color to land on the moon. They will spend almost a week living in Starship and exploring the lunar surface, performing a variety of scientific studies, including sampling water ice, first detected on the moon in 1971, by the way. Meanwhile, Orion and the remaining astronauts will complete 1 full orbit of the moon, lasting 6.5 days, before being rejoined by their fellow crew from Starship. Artemis 4 will deliver the International Habitation Module IHAB to Gateway, which will be followed by another crewed lunar landing. Similar to Artemis 3, 2 astronauts will go down to the lunar surface on board Starship and spend a week doing moonwalks, rover operations, and science experiments. Artemis 4 astronauts will also collect samples, which they will bring back to Earth on board Orion. As a part of the Artemis 5 mission, another module of Gateway, the European Space Agency's ESPRIT, or the Lunar View module, will be put in place. Following this delivery, another lunar landing will take place with 2 more astronauts who will do further surface science and collect more samples to take back to Earth. The Artemis base camp is planned to be established at the end of the decade. The base camp will be located in the South Pole region near the 2 adjacent Shackleton and de Garlac craters, due to the area's wide variety of lunar geography and also due to the abundance of water ice that is believed to exist in the lunar soils of the cratered floors. The base camp will consist of 3 main modules. The Surface Habitat Module, which is the initial dwelling structure and home base for the residents of the base. The Lunar Terrain Vehicle, which is an unpressurized rover cart for transporting suited astronauts around the vicinity of the base. This month, April 2024, NASA announced that Intuitive Machines, Lunar Outpost, and Venturi Astrolab are the 3 companies developing the LTV in a 12-month feasibility and demo phase. So more to see on that. The pressurized rover, a pressurized vehicle complete with longer range habitation facilities, thus enabling multi-day and longer range explorations. The Artemis Base Camp will support missions of up to 2 months and will be used to study technologies to use on Mars. The base may be used regularly for decades to come through both government and commercial programs. On April 9th of this year, just a couple of weeks ago, it was announced that JAXA and NASA have signed an agreement stipulating that Japan would design, develop, and operate a pressurized rover for crewed and uncrewed exploration of the moon. In return, NASA will provide the launch and delivery of the rover to the moon, as well as providing seats for 2 Japanese astronaut missions to the lunar surface, with the goal of these astronauts being the first non-American to travel to the moon's surface. The rover is planned to accommodate 2 astronauts for up to 30 days. NASA plans to use the pressurized rover for Artemis 7 and subsequent missions over an approximate 10-year lifespan. Here's a view of JAXA's lunar cruiser, which will be manufactured by Toyota. And here's a model of the cruiser on display. Pretty cool. And this model and this concept has been around for quite some time, several years. So it's pretty neat that this is breaking news, and we get a clearer vision of what technology will be roaming around on the moon. So for those of you that went to NEAF this past weekend, I'm envious. I wish I had the capability to do that, but thankfully the talks are on YouTube. I knew that there was going to be a panel discussion about Artemis, so I watched the panel discussion that took place on this past Saturday. And by the way, if you haven't seen this talk, I highly recommend you go on YouTube and check it out. Although the audio is awful, you have to really bump up the volume on your speaker system, but it is wonderful. It was moderated by Jerry Griffin to the right, who was the Apollo flight director. In the middle, you have Debbie Korth, who was the Orion deputy program manager. And on the left, Norm Knight, director of NASA Flight Operations Directorate. Norm Knight, the Flight Operations Directorate, is responsible for providing trained astronaut crew members and for overall planning, directing, managing, and implementing overall mission operations for NASA human spaceflight programs. The directorate is also responsible for all Johnson Space Center aircraft operations, including aircrew training. During this panel discussion, Norm equated his role to an orchestra conductor. So I really like that analogy. So these are really important key players in the entire Artemis program, other than Jerry, but it was good to see him there and have his input because Jerry was involved with every Apollo mission that ever flew. Also, Jerry Griffin interrupted Norm Knight at one point to point out the fact that he kept using the term we. He says, you notice how you don't say we, and the word I disappears from conversations like this. It really is a team effort in the deepest sense. He also pointed out that what is happening right now is dynamic, focused, and intense. And unlike the Apollo missions, the Artemis program has so much more technological capabilities that he's confident of their success. So those were some words from Jerry Griffin. Norm Knight spoke about how teams are working on building large structures on the moon by 3D printing them on the lunar regolith, and it's already being done in the lab. So if you want to build something on the moon, you 3D print it, and large structures too. Deb Korth mentioned how astronauts are now using augmented reality eyewear that is in their shield or in their glassware to be used as tools to assist them in things like putting spacecraft together while working in space or on the moon. And if you recall, Apollo astronauts, I believe they had mounted to their arm notes that they could flip inside their sleeve. Now they can see what they're doing right in their vision. So that is a game changer. So those were just some of the points that stood out from this panel discussion, but it kind of drove home that this is a real thing, that this is happening. My research for this talk did that for myself, but watching the panel discussion and these key players did the same, if not more. So if you're all looking for really good up-to-date information about Artemis beyond what I kind of gave you the groundwork and history of how the mission works, but if you'd like to stay abreast of things that are happening as they unfold, I have 2 recommendations. So Eric Berger is the senior space editor at ARS Technica, covering everything from astronomy to private space to wonky NASA policies. But he covers the Artemis programs a lot. And so if you go to ARS Technica and you look him up, you'll get up-to-date information all the time. If you like to read, that's great. If you like to watch video though and see a similar thing and pictures and moving video, this gentleman by the name of Philip Sloss basically takes Berger's information from ARS Technica, rewords it, puts graphics behind it, and I highly recommend subscribing to Philip Sloss's YouTube channel to really stay abreast of on top of all of this stuff. So that is my talk. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you very much.